Mr. President, my dear brother, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and to the honorable colleagues of mine on both sides of this proposition, and to all the brothers and sisters of all colors, and especially the younger generation who we are bequeathing the world to you, I have this to say. Wall Street and the critique of Wall Street and Occupy Wall Street movement for me is a matter of life and death. I was arrested twice. Police dragged us Harlem, 125th Street and 7th Avenue, as well as in front of Goldman Sachs. We put Goldman Sachs on trial, 6-hour trial, guilty. Why? Because I decided a long time ago I was going to be part of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Dorothy Day, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Gustavo Gutierrez, saying what? Engage in a fallible quest for unarmed truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, so you look at the world through the lens of the weak and vulnerable. I don't care what color, what civilization, what sexual orientation, to try to get outside of yourself. And also engage in a fallible quest for unconditional love, because I am a revolutionary Christian. I assure my dear honorable colleague, I am a revolutionary. You are absolutely right about that. Oh yeah, oh yeah, you got the right one. You got the right one. But I'm a revolutionary Christian, which means I understand that there's greed inside of all of us. All of us have gangster proclivities. We need democratic accountability. And what the Wall Street movement, what the Occupy Wall Street movement was all about was the call for democratic accountability for corporate hypocrisy, corporate mendacity, and corporate criminality. In America, where I come from the American empire. America is both fragile experiment in democracy, but also an adventure in empire. 1% of the population own 42% of the wealth. The top 400 individuals have wealth equivalent to the bottom 150 million. That's oligarchic, plutocratic, to some degree still pigmentocratic. When you talk about the legacy of white supremacy that I've taught in prisons for 32 years, we've put $1 trillion into the prison industrial complex, but when it comes to education, we can't find a penny. When it comes to decent housing, we can't find a penny. When it comes to jobs with a living wage, we can't find a penny, but we find is that a hand or is that just a camera? That's just a camera. But we find the money when it comes to jails and prisons for the weak and the vulnerable. I live in a society in which 22% of all of its children live in poverty, richest nation in the history of the world. That's morally obscene and spiritually profane. And I use the language of R.H. Tawney, one of my great heroes, the Christian socialism of R.H. Tawney, or the libertarian socialism of my dear hero, William Morris. There's a connection between what I'm talking about and the best of Oxford. Well, the last line of Percy Shelley's great revolutionary pamphlet, A Defense of Poetry, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And he's not talking about versifiers. He's talking about all human beings who decide to muster their imagination and empathy to conceive of a better world given the social misery and suffering in this world. 1% of the population in America get 81% of the income just a year and a half ago under my dear brother Barack Obama with his Wall Street government, with his connection to oligarchs and plutocrats. The only reason why the Occupy Wall Street movement took off in the way in which he did, it was the major public response to the class war that's being waged for 30 years against poor and working people, where you get a transfer of wealth from poor and working people to the well-to-do with the shadow banking system. Let's be honest about the billions and billions of dollars that are not accountable in any significant way, that do not generate jobs, don't generate productive value whatsoever, just go into private pockets, and yet workers dealing with stagnating wages, declining wages. How long do you think a fragile experiment in democracy can survive with 1% of the population getting off with that kind of, and I say criminality because market manipulation, insider trading, predatory lending, securities fraud, all of those are crimes. Not one Wall Street banker has even been investigated or prosecuted in any way. Why? Arbitrary rule of power. But it comes from my neighborhood. Come to the hood, come to the black, brown, or red community and get caught with a crack bag. You go to jail for 4 years. But a banker can get off with all kinds of criminal activity, walking around sipping tea, acting like somehow we don't know, acting as if we were born last night. I was born at night, but not last night. But it's also the sign, eliminate Israel. No, the sign that I saw was eliminate the Israeli occupation. That's something else. That's the signs I saw. That's the signs I saw. Because if you understand the greed inside of all of us, you say our Jewish brothers and sisters are precious, but they'll never have security if the justice of our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters are not intertwined. That's what the conversation was about. That's what that conversation was about. Oh, yes. And we recognize the drones, the dialogue we had about drones, dumping bombs on innocent people. And it was very controversial. We had sustained dialogues about it. Martyrdom is not normative for loving poor people and working people of whatever color. But some will have to die. Some will have to put their bodies on the line. 7,000 people arrested in 112 cities just in the American empire, raising the issues of democratic accountability. Why is it, Mr. President, you have a killer list every Tuesday and choose who dies? Those are war crimes. Oh, Brother West, why are you so critical of a black president? I love the brother. I'm a Christian. But to engage in that kind of activity makes him a war criminal with a Nobel Peace Prize. And he's going to have to come to deal with that. And to say nothing about poverty, nothing about the new Jim Crow in America, and I know I'm coming to a close. 1 out of 3 black men between 18 and 30 are either in prison, on parole, or on probation. Do you think somehow that's connected to the callousness, the indifference toward the weak and the vulnerable of people growing up in communities that are socially neglected, economically abandoned, and under intense police surveillance? In America, 13% of black youth engage in drug activity. 13% of white brothers and sisters engage in drug activity. 65% of the convictions are black. The criminal justice system itself, mendacious, unfair, in some ways criminal itself. That's what the Occupy Wall Street movement was about. And for white brothers and sisters from the vanilla side of town, to have them take a stand that connects empire, corporate power, and legacies of white supremacy and male supremacy. We're so glad you raised that issue. But also homophobia, also anti-Semitism. We don't put up with any anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Arab hatred, anti-Islamic hatred. We have to be morally consistent to preserve some integrity before you die. Ecological catastrophe, all of that dialogue took place, but it was like a jazz quartet more than a military band. There was multiple voices taking place, unable to provide the kind of streamlined harmony for what are the demands. We want to know what you believe. No, we're trying to get our instruments together. We're trying to find our voices. This is the early stages of it. This is the early stages. So I ask those in this chamber to at least give not just the movement a hand. Don't miss the message by being so preoccupied with the messengers. We're talking about the concrete suffering of precious human beings and ways in which they can straighten their backs up to engage in, yes, a fundamental transformation. I do believe in fundamental transformation. Democratic, nonviolent, but fundamental transformation, a transfer of power from oligarchs and plutocrats to those Sly Stone called ordinary people. Please vote for the proposition.